Excellent. So it's lovely to see all three of you here this evening in CADS Chat Live. This is a follow-up to a CADS TV thing that we did about the BBC Microbit with David Whale, who's here. Hello, David.
Hello.
Which has certainly been one of the most popular films on the channel so far. So we thought it would be a really nice idea to bring a few of the other folk who've been involved with this crazy, amazing project here into a sort of online discussion thing and get a recording of some views around this, some of folks' experience around this. Those in the room, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Shall I go first?
Go for it, David.
I've got a little tech demo I'm going to show off now.
Hello.
Hello, the voice of David.
My name is David. My name is David. I am a software engineer.
It's all got a little Stephen Hawking on us. Thank you very much. Okay, Howard.
Hi, I'm Howard Baker. I worked for the BBC very in the early days. I ran BBC Learning's innovation team, and it was our team that came up with the microbit 18 months, 2 years ago now.
Nicholas?
Hi, so yes, I'm Nicholas, and yes, I am a professional software developer. I usually work in the Python programming language, and I proposed and coordinated and contributed to MicroPython on the microbit. Now, David's little demonstration, I'm so tempted, but I'm not. I'm going to save it because we've got a whole bunch of really new stuff. David, I'll show you in secret later if you want. But that's coming in a fortnight's time. I have to sit on my hands, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry.
You're whetting our appetite. You really are. Right. Stuart, it's great to have you here too. Even if this is through the medium of... So Stuart is Innovative Teach on the Twitter and does lots of work with Microsoft around the microbit and some of Microsoft's other really exciting products in the coding education space. David, can I have a thumbs up that that was, broadly speaking, an accurate description of what you get up to? Oh dear.
2 taps for yes.
Fine. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. So, Howard, can we take you back to like a couple of years ago, whenever this started? What was the BBC trying to do with this? What was the aim of the project?
Well, this actually goes back to 2011, and there's 2 big reports that came out at that period of time. One from the Royal Society and one from Nesta within Livingston, which basically was saying, I mean, what they did was put a great big alert to the BBC. We picked up on those reports. Both reports were saying effectively the same thing, that the UK was losing ground in the skills area around computer science, that kids no longer understood what computers were. They were just mysterious black boxes. They couldn't program them, and that this was having a huge impact on computer science at university, which was the Royal Society report, and was having an impact on digital companies like games companies and special effects companies, which was effectively the Nesta report from Ian Livingston and Alex Hope. At the time, I was working in the BBC's innovation team. We actually sent a message to our boss and said, this looks very, very important. We think the BBC should do something about that. He said, yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Get started. So back in 2011, we started looking at this problem, and we started to look at various solutions, really. We did a lot of work, actually, in the early days. We talked to teachers, we talked to Miles, we talked to a lot of people, we talked to experts, and we basically asked them the question, if the BBC got involved in this, what should they do? Everybody said approximately the same thing, that this was a need to raise awareness around this, and a need to do something big and huge, and something that, something like the BBC could do. So we also started to look at technologies. How could we get kids coding? We actually came up with a number of different things. We had, in the early days, we had our own coding platform, which is very sweet and very nice, and you could do lots of different things on it. We then noticed that Maker was getting big, and we thought, okay, this is probably about making as well, and about creating stuff, and that coding would be a sort of, would come in because you were making something, that you actually wanted to achieve something, you wanted to build something. So we started looking at making. We had conversations right around the BBC about how could we get this going. We talked to people like Blue Peter. We said Blue Peter is an obvious place where we could do this. They could do digital makes. And what was falling out around this was that it was, making was still hard. When we talked to Blue Peter, they said their limit was £2 for something, and you can't do anything digital for £2 really. So we started to look at this. We started to think, well, how can we get kids into making? What can we give them? And then I started to think, well, I asked myself the question: what's the simplest thing? What's the most basic thing that we could actually give kids? It would have to be about £2. And it would probably need to be programmable, very simply programmable. Probably need some LEDs on it, some buttons, and some input and output. And we worked with a couple of different people, and in the end, a sort of microbit was born out of that very sort of simple desire. What can we do that's the cheapest, easiest thing? And can we give them away? So we built a very early prototype. We tested it everywhere. And everywhere we took it, the same response was the same. It was the same. Everybody loved this little thing. You'd give it to kids to program, and they were just huge grins on their faces. They just absolutely adored it. We took it to various CBBC events. We took it to Glasgow. We took it to Edinburgh. And it was the same. Parents loved it. There's huge queues to get their hands on one of these early microbits. It was the simplest thing to do. We just got kids to write messages on it. What we asked the kids was, what do you want to say to the world? What do you want to tell the world about yourself? And if they were 5, it was usually, I love my mummy. And if they were a bit older, it was usually, I love football or I love singing. And when they could see it, write a message that flashed on their microbits, and everybody could see this, they were just amazed. So we took it back into the BBC. They liked it. And actually, at that point, we're about 2013, and the new Director General announced that 2015 was the year for digital creativity. We showed them the microbit. They said, yeah, it's lovely. We understand it. What can you do that's amazing? We said, well, how about if we gave 1 million of them away? They said, right, that sounds like a good idea. How do you go away and organise doing 1 million of them? And that's when all the headaches started, really. And we realised that there was no way we were going to do this without partners. So the first thing we did was just get a lot of partners on board. We put out a very mysterious message saying, do you want to help the BBC get kids coding?
Yes.
And fortunately, we had lots of wonderful responses. And it started from there, really. We got everybody who said yes, were signed up. We got them around a table. We showed them the microbit, and we said, right, we want to build a bigger and a better one. It still has to be cheap, but it has to do amazing things, which is where it ended up, really. I can go on and on and on. I just want other people to talk, really, but that's...
I don't know whether my microphone is working anymore. Somebody else might need to steer this.
Miles, yes, your microphone is working, but your camera isn't, I'm afraid.
Okay, right, all right. So at least you can hear me. Howard, that's a fabulous story. Thank you ever so much for sharing that. What has surprised you about how the project has worked out, other than the challenges with the practical side of that?
What is surprised? Well, it is a continual surprise and joy to watch the expression on people's faces when they program this thing. It's a thing that has never left me. It was there from the very beginning, was this concept of this huge grin, this smile that it put on people's faces.
Yes.
And it continually works. And that is because there is a unique pleasure in the process, I think, and a nice surprise that something could be so easy and something could be so effective. I think the other things that have come out that not quite surprises, but things that sort of dawn on you. The idea that there were 25 LEDs, that you had a tiny screen, was actually extremely important. if you go and look at other things like a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino, there's nothing to tell you that actually something interesting is happening. But straight away with a microbit, there's this little screen that can smile at you, it can tell you, give you a message, it can flash, it can do lots of different things. And though we didn't realize it at the time, that is a unique and extremely important thing.
Yes.
When all the partners came on board and other things started to be added, like the accelerometer, like the compass, like the BLE, you then began to appreciate more and more why this device was such a clever little thing.
Yeah.
And what you began to realize, and David Whale was one of the people that started to do this as well, was that what you actually were introducing with something like the accelerometer was not, a science thing or a physics thing. This will tell you how fast, it will tell you its acceleration. What you were doing was introducing new modes of interaction that you could actually say, let me shake my microbit and something will happen. Let me tilt it and something was happening. So you're placed in the hands of kids a way of interacting with a device, which they could control. And what people like David Whale was doing was to then taking that and adding it to an object and creating games and experiences from objects. So you could attach the microbit to the object, and now if you shake the object, something would happen.
That's fabulous.
So you started to introduce the idea of smart objects. So straight away the microbit would not only in itself was endowed with properties that were interesting, it could endow other things, other objects with those properties. So that was something that was extremely interesting and a surprise, I suppose, in that you as you develop this thing, just more and more things happen. The other thing that's lovely, that is again was a huge surprise and wonderment to me, was the smartness of people. When we first developed the microbit and we had the LEDs, somebody said, and I sort of knew this in the background of my knowledge, somebody said that actually LEDs can also detect light. And you go, yeah, I did know that. So we thought, well, we can turn the LEDs into light detectors. So very early on, it was decided, and you do that by reversing the polarity of the LED. So it's not
that's so clever.
you need a bit of hardware. So very early on, when we put in the hardware, we made sure you could reverse the polarity of the LEDs. And lo and behold, the microbit is a light detector. It wasn't, there's no light detector sensor on there. You just use the LEDs.
So a lot of these ideas are coming from the partner organisations and individual folk who the BBC have been working with on this project. Are there some crazy and wacky ideas that have come from children themselves yet?
That's a good question. Yes. I mean, again, very, very much in the early days. When we did a test in schools, we took about 10 schools, I think it was about 12 schools actually, some at year 6 and some at year 7. And again, the experience was that they all thoroughly enjoyed it, they were all doing stuff with it. Within a day of this going into schools, we had flying cats, we had flying boats. But one of the most amazing things was, because I didn't expect it, some child, a little girl, wrote a story on a microbit. She did a pictorial story. It was called I Love Pizza. And you just watched the microbit and it showed you the pizza. I love pizza. There was a little picture of pizza. Do you love pizza? Do you want to share my pizza? And you saw the pizza getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the end it said, sorry, I've eaten all the pizza. And there was little crumbs left. I had never in my wildest imaginings thought somebody would do a picture story, a picture book on the microbit. Yet this 9-year-old child, that was one of the first things she did. And there was another girl who her sister was getting married, so she wrote her and she was going to have to do a speech, so she wrote her speech on the microbit, so the microbit flashed her speech. And we were, at the time, we were taking the microbits back, and she was distraught. She said, that's my speech. So we actually let her have it. We let her keep it.
So yes, the right thing to do.
Kids are, as I think we all know, are a huge joy. They, you give them something, they come up with stuff. Yeah, some brilliant stuff. I mean, I suppose we haven't seen any child, doing the equivalent of the LED yet, but
right.
it'll happen.
Yes, and putting them into the hands of children themselves rather than their schools, I think works very well for that point.
Yeah, it was an extremely important thing right at the beginning, both in terms of a sort of approach to education. We felt very strongly that though we were giving it through schools, and schools were an important part of this whole process, that also informal learning was an important part of this process.
Yeah.
You know, experience with the BBC Micro, experience with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, is that where they were really taking off it was in the bedroom, in groups and in clubs and things like that. So in the informal space. So we very much felt that a child should be able to take this into the informal space. And
that certainly seems to have been the experience with the Raspberry Pi, and for my generation, the BBC Micro. Yes, we had them in schools, but it was the folks who played with this and made something of this at home who really got the most out of this.
Absolutely right. And I think it, in a sense, speaks to that technology of itself, because what we also wanted was a sense of ownership. And I think when it sits in your own bedroom or in your own home, you feel like you own the thing, therefore you own the technology, therefore you are interested in the technology, and therefore you want the technology to do things that you want it to do. And I think that's a huge, important thing, that you have ownership, both of the technology and of the things you create with that technology. So it's extremely important to us, right from the beginning, that ownership was a fundamental part of this. And I think, to be honest, I think that's true in education in general. I think if a child owns what it is that they are learning, or owns what it is that they are learning through, then their adoption and their interest in it grows enormously.
Yes, love of learning matters much more than learning to code, even in Python.
Yeah.
Okay, David, can I turn to you now? And I think Howard has rather nicely set this up and talked about some of the projects that you've been involved in. Tell us some of the things you've had children doing with these microbits.
Okay, so a couple of things I would say about technology, just to lead on from what Howard said. So one of the great things about the microbit is that there's so much built in. So you can hit the ground running from day one. So with the onboard LEDs and the accelerometer and compass, it means you don't have to plug loads of extra bits into it to start doing things with it. So what we did at the IET was a bit twofold. So we made some videos. We spoke to some of our engineers, and I say we lent them a microbit. We actually took the microbit down with a film crew on the day. They'd never seen it until the day they filmed. And we spoke to them about a project that they would like to make that was contextual. It made sense for their industry. And we worked with them to develop these programs. We have these little 1-minute videos, and then we show those in our challenge days. And what we do see is that...
so give us some examples here, please, David.
Yeah, sure. So one of them is a scoreboard timer. One of our engineers plays canoe polo. A guy called Rob Edmonds from Cell XES, and he came up with an interesting challenge. And what he said was, it's a fast-paced game, and on those little 25 LEDs, I want to show the score of both Team A and Team B, and the remaining game time in minutes and seconds. Now, how do you do that on 25 LEDs? Now,
well, I'm immediately thinking of some sort of binary display there, but I suspect that the scrolling text.
Yeah, but I think it does highlight one of the key things about the microbit that children really understand. We've really been seeing this in our challenge days around the schools. And that's that if you give someone limited resources, then they will understand what's important. So what we did is we showed them a way that you can, with limited resources, do that, which is basically like a tug-of-war line on the screen. And then as you press the A button, the line gets closer to button A. And as you press the B button, it gets closer to button B. And then anyone in the
time remaining is dropping the line down at each stage.
Well, what happens is that anyone that's in the water, it's a really busy, fast-paced game. So they just shout out time, and then you shake the microbit, and then the time has a number of dots at the top and the bottom, which represents minutes and seconds. And then you can come to the end and see the final score. And we do see that actually children are not frightened to work within the limitations and also the opportunities of the device. And what we see a lot at our challenge days is we see children doing role plays where the microbit is part of the story. And I think this is tying back.
How's it going?
Yeah, this is
How's it going?
I just shook my microbit.
That's fine.
Picked up the wrong one. Pick up this one. Yeah, so telling a story with the microbit, which links on to what Howard was saying. And we had these girls that had built a project which was basically a safety device for a car. And they sat in a chair and they mimed driving and the car crashing. And the microbit played a role in getting a message to, to someone to help them. And we see a lot of role play. And I think it really does tie back to what Howard was saying, that telling a story on the microbit, so using the microbit as a piece of technology to augment a bigger story, something that's coming through. We did a load of other projects to try and give them a bit of an idea. So one of the ones we did with one of our engineers who works on the Mars Rover program was we did a parachute tester. So basically you build to a little plastic cup with a parachute, and you chuck it off the top of a building, and it uses the accelerometer and compass to measure how much it spins and how much it tilts. And at the end, you can read those readings out and then make a better parachute and test it again. So we see a lot of the idea here was just to show them the sorts of things that you could do with the onboard sensors.
David, tell us how you go about getting the data off the microbit after you've dropped it down, after the parachute's opened. Where can we see that historical log of accelerometer data?
Right, so this was done very early on in the program. So the IET have been delivering out in schools since January, and I understand there's various activities going on at the moment to get file systems and data login and things in. So we didn't have any of it. So what we basically do is we use the buttons. So the device measures free fall, and then when it senses no movement for 3 seconds, it stops the measurement system and takes 3 seconds off. And then you just press the buttons, and you read out the readings. Every time you press the button, you get a different reading. There's 5 readings.
Okay, so just reading it off the display of the bit itself.
Yeah.
Sorry. Are you seeing very much done around communicating between one bit and another bit, or a bit in a computer, or a bit in a phone?
Not a huge amount, because I don't think that's any negative reason against the microbit. It's just that in a challenge-led program, what we've got to try and do is make sure that throughout the whole of the season, it's fairly consistent how it's presented.
Yeah.
When we started in January, there was no Bluetooth, there was no communication. And now when we're about to finish, I think July the 18th is our national finals at Bletchley Park. So the season is about to finish, and of course there's all sorts of Bluetooth and radio access and file storage systems and things. So we've had to be fairly consistent about what we show.
These additional bits of the system have come online since the launch of the bit, or since the launch of your challenge days.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the official launch of the microbit was, into schools was on the 22nd of March.
Yeah.
So we'd been delivering in schools for about 3 months before then. So.
Wow.
We've had to be very careful to. We're not stopped them using any facilities, so there's facilities. So we haven't specifically pushed that as an activity. But often, what we've found is children have still told the story. So there's been right from the start. There was an intern from Microsoft that had written a little network that works across cables. So you put crocodile clips between microbits. And we've seen children telling stories based around those as well.
Tell me, are you seeing a difference between the way girls are using these and boys are using these?
Good question. I'm probably not the best to answer that, because I've not seen every single challenge day, so I've got to observe a few of them. What I would say is that level of excitement is pretty much identical. And so I went to observe an event down in London a few weeks ago, and I was walking the lab manager of the centre around. I said, "Oh, come over here, because something magic is going to happen in a moment." And we walked over to a table of girls, and I said, "You're about to experience a microbit moment." And he looks at me and says, "What's that?" And just as he said, "What's that?" the girls had downloaded their program that they'd written on the PC, and it flashed something up on the screen, and they all let out a big cheer. Just, it works, it works. And I said, "That's it."
It is amazing. It really is. This sense of writing software which takes control of a device is a fabulous experience. It really is.
And I think what's important is it's writing the code on the PC and then transferring it onto a device that you own, that's in your hand. And I think that's key. And it plays back to what Howard was saying about ownership, the fact that it's your device and you can decide what it does. It's very, very important.
Thank you ever so much. Nicholas, can we turn to you now? Now, you've been working on this and developing MicroPython for the microbit, as well as this really rather fabulous desktop-based IDE for Python, this Mu editor. Which shall we start with, the microbit stuff or the Mu stuff?
I don't mind. Shall we start with the microbit and MicroPython?
All right.
First,
okay.
Everybody else has been talking about that. So, what would you like to know?
Right, okay. So we had three languages set up there right from the start. We had the CodeKeys editor, we had the little block-based editor, and we had Touch develop. What does MicroPython bring to the party?
Well, it brings Python, obviously. So MicroPython is a full re-implementation of Python 3, but without the standard library, and with modules that allow you to interact with the microbit itself. So this is the same version of Python that you might use on a Raspberry Pi or on your PC. So I guess the first thing that Python brings is this sense of continuity. So the skills that you learn whilst taking your first steps programming on the microbit using MicroPython can be transferred easily to a Raspberry Pi or a PC or whatever. In fact, they're economically viable skills because you could get a job as a Python programmer. That's what I do.
Okay, I'm getting a little bit of feedback on your audio, I think.
It was there just now.
Okay.
So I can hear you echoing back to me, Miles. And I can't hear my echo anymore. So I'm assuming the problem's been fixed. So I'm going to continue talking until you wave at me or something like that. So the second thing I guess that that MicroPython brings along is the Python community as well. So Python is one of the world's most popular programming languages. It's used, Google, Microsoft, the BBC even use Python. You inadvertently use Python every day when you browse the web. And so there are literally, hundreds of thousands of Python programmers all around the world, and Python is famous for being a friendly community, a community that cares about diversity and education, and this is actually how we got involved, because Python is free software. We give it away for free. But somebody has to own the copyright for it, and that is the job of the Python Software Foundation, which is a charitable organization that holds the intellectual property for Python, and it also runs Python conferences, and the money it makes from those conferences it gives back to the community by supporting projects and things. And the Python Software Foundation was one of the original partners on the microbit project. So having the Python community behind you is rather interesting because, for example, working with Yvonne in CAS, managed to organize a whole bunch of workshops for teachers around the country, and because Python programmers are also around the country, they turned up as well, and this was sort of grassroots CAS hub-based meetups where real live programmers, Python programmers, were turning up and working with teachers, and this sort of built on the experiences that we'd had at PyCon UK, where we have an education track, which you've been to, Miles, where we buddy up developers and teachers together, and we have an awful lot of fun. So I guess that's the second thing that Python brings to the community, to microbit.
And that's something we've been wanting to do as CAS for a long time now, I think, of bridge those connections between the software industry and those who are teaching computing in schools. But it's needed something like your MicroPython and the BBC Microbit to make that happen.
This is hugely important. So although I am I'm echoing now. Somebody turn the microphone off. Although I am a Python programmer now, I used to be a secondary head of music, senior teacher. And one of the things that struck me about talking to colleagues, former colleagues who were IT teachers, a music teacher is expected to be competent at playing instruments, doing concerts, bringing to life music. Yet that doesn't really happen. And that expectation exists for ICT. I think it's David. You're going to have to mute yourself, please. There he goes. And the echo stopped. Back on again. That's it. Thank you very much, David. You're the one causing the echo. Don't worry. So it's important that colleagues who work in ICT education get current skills. They get exposure to what's happening in industry, and this is why, for 5 years we've been running an education track at PyCon UK, is so that teachers have a very cheap and easy way to make contact with this community and adopt a developer, and we've had some really great successes come out of that in terms of teacher and developer collaboration. So it's I couldn't agree more with you, Miles. It's an essential thing. So you're on mute and I can't hear what you're saying, Miles.
Right. I think you can. Oh, and it's just muted again.
No, you're on. I can hear.
Hang on.
Can I just add?
Yes, please.
Can I just add some of that?
Yes.
I'd just like to say that, again, from the point of view of the BBC and certainly the work we were doing, it was extremely important to us to get Python on board. Absolutely for the reasons that Nicholas has just said, both in terms of the importance of the language and to make sure that the microbit hit as many languages as it possibly could, and when I'm going to use this word, useful languages that would actually be meaningful to the kids that were using them, and in a sense industry languages, so that they could, having worked from the microbit, they could travel very easily into other areas, because Python would allow them to do that. And the same with JavaScript. That was why we wanted JavaScript. That was there, that once they learned something with either JavaScript or Python, they could go to another device, another thing, and they would have a complete understanding of what was happening, and it would give them a real good kickstart. I think the other one that we were really keen on was this idea of the community, that again, something like the microbit is only going to really work when there's a communities behind it and communities working with it. So,
and you have that notion of legitimate peripheral participation, that the young person starts learning to program in MicroPython on the microbit, takes that along to the local Python community, gets involved, shows that to other people there, and starts developing really interesting things at a bigger scale afterwards.
Absolutely. So you see this with the Raspberry Jams and the way the way the Raspberry Pi has leveraged the community. That sort of thing has really allowed the Raspberry Pi to flourish, and it's something I certainly hope that we can see happen with the microbit. And it's important because these places are a way for people to celebrate their successes and also find allies. And I know, because I spend most of my time trying to fix broken things rather than creating new code. It's also good for a support channel. You've been frustrated about why this thing doesn't work, and you go along, and then you might meet David Well at your local Raspberry Jam, and he'll be able to tell you, well, actually, what you want to do is blah, 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 and away you go, kind of suitably inspired and ready to go. And this is the important thing about the microbit. One of the most important things for me is that it gives you a very quick way to succeed. So this microbit moment that David talked about, where this group of girls have managed to put their code onto the device, and it was like high fives, and we've really done it. I've seen that an awful lot when I've watched kids use microbits, and also software developers as well. There's something rather nice about seeing this thing happen on this device, as you said, Miles. And that kind of rush of success, sustains you through those down times when, you know, this damn thing doesn't quite work, and, you know, if only I got it right, then it'll succeed, and then it makes it all the more sweet when this thing does the thing that you want it to do. So microbit makes it very easy to get into that sort of programming style. I really enjoy that sort of program. Good.
Okay, can I just step back from the microbit for a couple of moments? Why is Python our default language of choice up in Key Stage 3? How come it seems to have taken off in so many schools?
So, I think a lot of it rests with Guido. Guido van Rossum is the creator of Python, of course, and he wrote it to be a teaching language.
Right.
I know, because I've worked with some of the Python core developers, they spend an inordinate amount of time discussing how to make Python simple, obvious, easy to learn, that sort of thing. It's said to be an expressive language. It should be very easy for you to express yourself with Python. You shouldn't have to create lots of boilerplate code and blah 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 to make LEDs work. They should just work with one line, and it should be obvious what you need to do. So an awful lot of thought has gone into Python. It's not perfect by any means, but the important thing is that the developers who create Python and the community that comes along with Python are very passionate about education. So I think that's a big reason. The fact that Python is such a joy to use as a professional programmer means that it's also a very useful programming language. So, you know, if I learn Python, I'm going to be able to do amazing things with other bits of equipment. For example, at a recent conference, I saw somebody control a radio telescope array through the magic of Python, and they had a webcam pointed at an array of 20-odd dishes in South Africa somewhere, and they issued a command in front of the whole conference, and these dishes went like that, and, you know, there was data coming through, and the data was being processed by Python, and blah 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 blah. These were scientists, these weren't professional programmers, but they were clever people. They needed to know how to code. What language is powerful enough that we can do the things that we need to do, but is easy enough for us non-computer science specialists to pick up? Let's use Python. So it's easy. It's fun.
Do you and Howard and David think we ought to be teaching several languages in lower secondary school, or should we be getting really good at using one less language in that sort of expressive, being able to do something really quite sophisticated mode that you seem to be suggesting there?
I think that, well, okay, so my experience as a professional developer is that I'm a polyglot programmer. I use lots of different languages for lots of different things. Python just happens to be a great general purpose language, but if I mean, today, this afternoon, I spent half the afternoon writing in JavaScript. I also write in C# an awful lot, or Java. I can use Ruby. There's Lisp as well, which is a language that I love to use. So it's important.
Which is fine for you as a professional developer, but what about that learning experience for 11 to 14-year-olds? What's best there, do you think?
I'm not sure. Thinking back to my own experience, like you, Miles, we're probably of a very similar age, because I grew up with a BBCB. My mum and dad were both teachers. My dad was a head teacher, so he brought his school's BBCB home one weekend with the intention of trying to learn how to use it, and it took about half an hour for my brother and I to wrestle it from him and take it over for the rest of the weekend. And we learned with BBC Basic. And so I guess having a single language that you could use is useful insofar as you're just learning one thing. But I think it's important that that learners understand, and this is introduced, that there are lots of different choices, and different languages are good at different sorts of things. So it's important to choose the right tool. I guess it's a bit like saying you're only allowed to use hammers in your CDT lesson. You know, you're not going to make.
Which is possibly fine for woodwork, but not so good for the fabrics or the cookery.
Exactly.
Actually, one thing I would just add in there, Miles, is I was just thinking back as Nicholas was explaining that story to my experience as an 11-year-old. And when I was learning to code, yes, it was basic, but there was a lot of different dialects of basic around. And I remember learning, I think the first basic I learned on was probably Commodore PET Basic. But then there was BBC Basic and ZX Spectrum Basic and all these different dialects. And I think if you cut your teeth on one language and you learn the basic concepts, the good concepts of sequence selection, iteration, modularization, and then you can start to transport those between different languages. And to do that properly, to really understand what it is that makes a computer work and how to get the best from a programming language, I think you get that by seeing lots of different experiences. And one of the great things about the microbit is, I mean, I've lost count. I'm probably doing a disservice. There's probably 5, 6, 7 different languages that are already running on it, and I understand that someone has actually written a version of BASIC that runs on it. I saw someone on one of the forums a while ago talking about that there's now a version of Forth that runs on the microbit. So there's lots and lots of people porting different languages to the microbit, and I think that adds to its diversity and its breadth. But I mean, some of the smaller languages, like the blocks, are very, very quick to get going with.
Yeah.
I went into a school that had not done much coding before. The experience was amazing because I walked in with a box load of microbits, never been in the class before. We showed some of the BBC videos. We showed them the on-screen simulator. We got them all logging in. Everything just worked first time. Got them doing a name badge through the microbit moment, and they said, right, there you go, come up with an idea. And within an hour workshop, they all came up with some sort of idea that you press the button and this happens, or you shake it and that happens. So very basic input and output. And we did that particular one with blocks because it was very quick to get into. But there's lots of places to go, and we had some of the kids in that class that had already done some work in the microbit. There was a lad. This will make you smile, Nicholas, because there was a lad that said he'd been playing with Mu, and he'd even got Mu installed, and he'd been able to get that to work. And he was asking me lots of deep techie questions about Python, and this was the target age group. So I think.
David, I think that brings us very nicely on to Mu, which I wanted to talk about with Nicholas. So the Python experience, I was doing some training yesterday. We were doing the whole idle thing, and there were unpleasantnesses around that, or at least from my point of view it was, and I think possibly for the delegates in the room with me. It doesn't seem a particularly positive experience of Python for 11 to 14-year-olds. What are you trying to do with Mu? What is Mu?
Okay, so Mu is a code editor for beginner programmers. So it doesn't matter what age you are. If this is the first time you are programming, or you're an inexperienced programmer, Mu is for you. Idle. So there are lots of Monty Python jokes in the Python community because Python was named after Monty Python's Flying Circus and not the snake. So that's an interesting BBC-related Python link there too. Idle, as in Eric Idle, is the default development environment that comes packaged with the Python programming language, and it's very long in the tooth, and the Python community are painfully aware that it's not the nicest thing to have to use if you're a beginner programmer. But because it appears to be the default thing that comes with Python, and it's what the Raspberry Pi uses as its default Python editor, then people have sort of started using it. Mu, I noticed that Idle wasn't that nice to use, and also that when we ran a whole bunch of workshops in the autumn of last year with teachers, they didn't particularly enjoy using a browser for development because they had to download the hex file, find it on the file system, plug in the microbit, drag it over to the microbit, the thing would flash, and then la 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 la. And this added roadblocks to the development experience. So the first thing I did was based on some work myself, Dan Pope, who's a Python buddy of mine, and Damien George, who's the creator of MicroPython. The three of us got together and we created a very, very simple editor called Puppy. Puppy was great, but a bit of a hack. Carrie-Anne Philbin of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, we had a chat about what are teachers feeding back to the Raspberry Pi Foundation about what they want. What are young learners wanting from a code editor? And essentially it was, we want a big box where we can type software with some very obvious buttons that tell us what we can do with this code. Okay, and so the user interface for Mu was created, and we added interesting features such as Mu will detect where your microbit is, so you just have to click the flash button. You don't have to drag it anywhere or drag your code anywhere. Mu will take care of all that for you, and Mu will also do interesting things that teachers like. For example, you can make the text a lot bigger or a lot smaller depending on whether you are on a whiteboard or not, so that people at the back of the class can see what the code is. And this is also great for presentations. So when I'm talking at a conference, I might use Mu as my code editor for that very reason. But perhaps the most fun aspect of Mu is that it can connect to the microbit so that you can use what's called the Python REPL. And the REPL is a little bit like the prompt that you got on the BBC-B. You can type basic into the BBC-B and it will respond. So it's a bit like having a conversation with your computer. Well, the REPL stands for read, evaluate, print, loop, which tells you exactly what this thing does. It reads your input, it evaluates it, it prints the result, and then it loops back to wait for the next piece of input that you're going to give it. So typing Python directly into the REPL gives you an incredibly interactive experience with the device, because you can do live programming with the device. You can make things flash on and off. You can get it to play sounds. You can take readings immediately and things like that. Right. So having the REPL built into Mu and being able to mess about and play and break things and try ideas out, it's a bit like a scratch pad, and then type that into your code in the main window so that you're experimenting as you go along. I think that's a very powerful thing to be able to do. So Mu is that we're going to release one more version of Mu that targets the microbit specifically, and that will come with some special features that I'm not going to talk about because I'm giving a keynote at EuroPython in 2 weeks, and that's when we want to tell people about it. Plus, they're not finished yet. But if people are interested, they could look at my GitHub repository and see the commits coming in. But that will be the last version of Mu specifically for the microbit, and what we hope to do is make Mu a general Python editor, so that anybody could use it for any Python-related work for beginner programmers. And the same philosophy of simplicity and obviousness, and just let me write the code, and please do the obvious thing, is encapsulated in that editor. Interestingly, I've had feedback from developers who say, well, why don't you do this? And where's the Save As button? And I would really like it if I could do this, blah, 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 blah. And to that I say, well, if you're asking for those features, you're too advanced for Mu. Go use a proper editor now, a real editor. Graduates, if your students are asking for these features, that's a good sign that they're ready to go to the next level, which is a proper IDE or a proper code editor with some of the more advanced features built in.
And I think we see that with Scratch, and we see that with the blocks editor or the microbit, that sooner or later you want to do things which the technology doesn't simply allow you to do. So you need to move on to something a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Okay. So the microbit and the Raspberry Pi are not dissimilar machines. Are they competing with one another? What are the key differences? Which would you recommend a school use, I suppose? Go on.
I would like to address this because I think this is very important. To talk about those two technologies competing is, I think, and I don't mean any disrespect here, disingenuous.
I'm so sorry.
It's no. It's not as if there's a finite technology education pie that is only going to be divvied out to certain things. It's not like we're trying to divvy out a finite pie. We just want to make more pies, okay? And there's a Raspberry Pi type of
Raspberry Pis.
Microbit type of pie. There's an Arduino type of pie. There's all sorts of different types of pie. And the business that I'm in, and I think the people at the Raspberry Pi Foundation are in, are making more pies, not trying to divvy up and compete for one pie, because I think that's not a good way of looking at it. The important thing is that the microbit complements the Raspberry Pi. There's the Python aspect that you can graduate from Python on the microbit to Python on the Raspberry Pi. There's the fact that they both have GPIO with very similar libraries, if you use Python anyway. And we did that on purpose because I know Ben. Ben's a friend of mine. He wrote the GPIO library for the Raspberry Pi. Some of the guys, we met at PyCon UK and we coordinated. It's that sort of thing that I think is important. It's a bit like saying, to use a musical analogy, it's like, do you teach brass or do you teach strings? And are they competing? Well, no, they're not, because you need both to play in an orchestra. So, wow, what a great metaphor to improvise on that moment.
Howard, at some point in this long history of the microbit, somebody must have said, why don't we just use the Raspberry Pi here? Why develop our own platform? Do you have a perspective on this?
Well, interestingly, I mean, the very, very, very early days of the Raspberry Pi, they came to the BBC. They wanted the BBC to adopt it. And unfortunately, at that period, which is probably about 6-7 years ago now, maybe even longer, I was at the first meeting. The BBC wasn't in a place to do that. I think for us, and certainly part of the logic always was that this is not a competition. You know, I'll go back to what Nicholas was saying and what we were saying really about software, and that's about tools. I mean, I think what you place in the hands of kids are tools to do things, and what they realize is that one tool is well suited to one type of thing and another tool is well suited to another. The microbit is a tool to do a certain set of things that the Raspberry Pi can't, and the microbit can't do some of the things that the Raspberry Pi can do. And in a sense, what we wanted to do, and this was very, very clear and very, very key, was to put something that was simple into the hands, and I'm going to use the word hands, of kids, that they could hold something in their hand and very, very simply make it do something.
And this is
the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, because this is a simple program. This is a more accessible platform.
Yes. Yeah. So it was always meant to be a stepping stone, and you know, I love the Raspberry Pi. It is an amazing thing, but it is also it is not an easy start machine to work with. You know, you really do. You need resilience. You need to have a little bit of knowledge, and if you are a complete novice, unfortunately, the Raspberry Pi ends up in a drawer. Because it's a hard start.
Yeah.
And what we wanted was what we wanted was an easy start, the easiest start you could possibly ever have. And I think we probably achieved that with the microbit. You know, and that's the genius of everybody who worked on it, is that it is one of the simplest things you can ever start with. Once you're experienced with it, in the same way that Nicholas was saying about the Mu editor, once you're experienced with it, you will know that you need to move on to something else. If you want it to do something else, then you're going to have to pick up an Arduino, or you're going to have to pick up a Raspberry Pi. But what we liked to think was that we'd given you some resilience, we'd given you some starting knowledge with which you had a reason, therefore, to go and get that Raspberry Pi back out of the drawer, because you now needed it. You realized why you needed it. You realized why you would have to go through some of the headache and some of the setup that was needed to get your Raspberry Pi working.
That's
so
right.
that was a real key thing for us, an easy start, and something that would lead you on to the technologies that were already succeeding. You know, in our head we had the novice in our mind, not the person who already knew what to do, because they were already doing it. You don't want the 3 or 4 people who already know how to do it. You want the thousands of kids who don't know.
Yes.
And you want to put in there. And again, I say this thing about hands. I'm quite convinced now that there is a really true physical relationship between learning, understanding, experiencing, and something fitting in the palm of your hand. And I think it's to do with something about tool use, that we are the prime tool users on this planet, and tools fit into our hands. So if you put a microbit in my hand, I already begin to understand it as a tool. I may not know quite how to use it, but my brain already goes, this is a tool, I can use this thing. So in doing that, you've already overcome a number of things, and I think these things are quite important. We are talking about fundamental things of being a human being, and one of them is something sits in my hand and I can use it in my hand.
That's very powerful, thank you. Let me round off with 3 questions that were posted onto the Google form registering for this chat. So I think the first goes to David, really. What single value for money add-on would you recommend for the Raspberry Pi, David?
The microbit, you mean?
Sorry, yes, I do mean the microbit. Oops. Freudian slip.
Single value for money add-on.
Yeah.
Speaker.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll speak up. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Actually, I quite like. I'm going to mention two, and people can decide, out of those which they like. But the one I've got the most value from myself. I think someone else might need to mute because it's going a little bit echoey. The one I've got the most value out of myself is the edge connector, so the Kitronic edge connector. And they do a little ball that's pre-soldered, and I think why that's quite good is that you're limited to. I think Nicholas has got one, has he, in his shed there? You're initially limited to 3 connectors, and the edge connector opens up all those other pins, so you end up with a good 15, 20 GPIOs of all sorts of shapes and sizes and functions on there. I think one of my personal favourites, which is a bit simpler, is again Kitronic. They've done a little backpack, which has I think it's got a battery and a buzzer on it, and it connects through to the pins. And I just love the form factor of that. But in terms of function, I think the edge connector is probably my key thing. If I had to buy one thing, I'd buy an edge connector.
Unmute.
I thought I had one here, David, but I know where it is. It's back in my house rather than my shed. I just to back you up there. Yes, that edge connector with the breakout board is excellent for sticking things onto a microbit in an easy way. I'd also add a speaker as well, because all the official partner programming languages are capable of making sound through the microbit to a greater or lesser extent. And as a former music teacher, I'm always up for things that make bloops and bleeps and things like that. So this is a great opportunity for cross-curricular things with your music department as well.
And Nicholas, of course, isn't allowed to say, but what next for the microbit?
On MicroPython?
Okay.
Okay, so we've been doing an awful lot of work on lots of different things. So you will see upgrades in the new editor. You will see lots of upgrades and bug fixes with MicroPython itself, including some super amazing, I wish I could tell you about them, features that are coming down the line and will make the device incredibly exciting for kids to use. Like Howard, we've been focusing on the children and trying to work out what is it that will get them to that moment that goes, my God, this is amazing. I really want to just do more of this sort of stuff and be inspired by the creativity that they can achieve through using this device. So we are trying to make Python and the microbit as playful as possible. Yeah, that's basically. I know I'm plugging my keynote at EuroPython. But watch the keynote at EuroPython, and I will reveal all there. That's the date that we're working to get these things finished.
Thank you, Howard. What do you think's coming next?
We are actually working now on the Internet of Things. So I'm working with some of the original team on the microbit to start getting a proper IoT system on there. So it's working with the wonderful Joe Finney at Lancaster University to get stuff in the runtime, and then to develop a protocol that says this is what the microbit expects, this is what it does, and basically we want an open system. Anybody can build an IoT system on top of it, but effectively deliver the promise that microbit will be an Internet of Things device. Because I think my personal view is that's the future, that's the exciting thing that's coming down the road that we would like to get kids thinking about.
And will there be a set for next year's Year 7s?
I don't think it'll come from the BBC, but we would. It would be wonderful if somebody could step up. If anybody's very, very wealthy out there and wants to step up, then that's extremely welcome.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you thought about doing a Kickstarter for it?
There is. I mean, what the plan was to create a legacy foundation, a bit like the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So that plan is still going ahead. It has been taking a longer time than I think the BBC wanted it to take, but I think you will see that happening, and there will be a foundation, and the aim of the Microbit Foundation will be to develop the microbit, help it. Version 2, version 3, but to help sales and to help overseas sales and to help to help the next microbit delivery, really. So I think that's the only thing that's slightly absent at the moment is that idea of a foundation somewhere. Somebody will pick this up and actually say, right, this is the future. This is how it's going to move forward. And I'm crossing my fingers like mad that over the next few weeks that's what will happen.
So an important thing that needs to be mentioned here as well is that I believe in 2 or 3 weeks' time, all the assets required for anybody to recreate the project will be released under open source license. And I remember, Howard, meeting you at one of the very early meetings, and you were explaining that this is kind of part of the vision, is that the microbit is open source all the way down to the hardware. And so with the publication of the schematics, you'll be able to get people all around the world creating their own versions of the microbit hardware and taking ownership of the device and innovating and sharing that back into the hardware community. I agree with you, Howard. This embedded Internet of Things stuff is very exciting and very important, because I guess that's where the momentum is heading in terms of the tech industry.
I'm conscious that we're at 9 o'clock, but David, I think you wanted the last word on the Internet of Things.
Yeah, very briefly. And I know Howard mentioned the amazing Joe Finney from Lancaster, and I was very honoured to work with Joe at one of the Cisco Little Big Award events earlier the year, and he gave this fantastic presentation, and I can basically summarise in just a few words what he said. He put up a picture of the old computers like the BBC Micro and the Commodore 64 and all of those computers that basically looked like a keyboard, didn't they? They had a keyboard in a case, and he said, and that was the computer for our generation. And what did we invent? That's it. We invented things that look like keyboards. And what the future is going to be, the future is going to be IoT. And it's small, it's battery powered, it's onboard sensors. Look what the microbit is. So you know, this is going to be the tool for the next generation to invent the future.
It's fabulous. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving up an hour of your evening to have this conversation. I think that's been really very interesting. Thank you all ever so much.
You're
We'll
welcome.
stop the recording now.
Okay, excellent.
Bye-bye.